Hello, Bobs. We're back with The White Cat by Gelett Burgess, a novel of multiple personality. Presumably, it is the White Cat, Mrs. Joy Fielding, who is such the White Cat, as she called herself. Chapter 5, Sliced Kisses, Fried in Tears, were the words I heard Miss Fielding reply to Leah's morning call early the next day. I had waited long, for the day was bright, and I wakened at sunrise. Her fanciful order put me immediately into a good humor, and I was intensely curious to see what the day would bring forth. The collies were barking vociferously, joyously. Suddenly they stopped, and then, one by one, I heard them greet their mistress. It was very prettily done. Leah, coming in, found me smiling and smiled back at me. Seeing me so much better, she offered timidly to help dress me, and I welcomed her proposal to bring me hot water and what was necessary for shaving. My own clothes had been sent down, so I prepared myself for my chatelain's visit. Joy came into my room with a sweet, low, "Good morning, Mr. Castle," which threw me back not a little after what had taken place on the yesterday. I was about to hazard some good-natured sarcasm, but the sight of her face inhibited it, and something of what Leah had said came back to me. I answered the greeting without comment, therefore, and waited for her to set the pace. She was in an exquisitely fresh, simple, organdy frock, and had on a garden hat and gauntleted garden gloves. Her arms were filled with roses. Her brow wrinkled slightly as she noticed the fading blossoms which had been left in the vases. Or is it the vases? "I'm afraid I neglected you yesterday," she said, as she set about removing the dejected roses and putting fresh ones in their places. As she came near me, I noticed little dewy drops on her neatly coiled hair, where she had dashed it with violet water. There was no trace of any other scent, save that of the roses. She drew off her gloves, and I saw that she wore no rings. She sat down for a moment. I had observed before that not only could Miss Fielding be remarkably graceful in pose and in action, but that she could be as astonishingly gauche as well. Astonishingly, that is, for her, for one who could be so graceful. This, however, was decidedly one of her graceful days, or rather, perhaps, as Leah had said, moods. Her lines melted and composed. There was positive elegance in the way she used her hands, gesticulating freely. It enhanced the charm of her voice, so limpid and full of feeling. "Isn't it a beautiful morning? What a shame it is that you can't get up. You must hurry and convalesce, just enough to be able to see the place, and not so much as to have to go away. Perhaps you can get into a chair by tomorrow." Interesting, the spelling of tomorrow with a 2-T-O, but that was normal for them. I'm not sure why. I probably should look into that, since I've seen it in numerous authors, including Robinson Jeffers, who frequently used that for today, tomorrow, all of those. "Did you hear my doggies? I can recognize each of them by the voice, and you will be able to, too, if you only stay here long enough. Nokomis is the deepest toned one. She's the oldest, you know, and the most dignified. Hiawatha is the little yappy one. He's a very silly little pup. I'm sorry Nokomis didn't want to come up to see me yesterday," I said, "but I hope you'll pardon my taking the liberty of asking for her. I know you probably don't often allow them in the house." "Why, of course Nokomis can come up. The idea! She'd love it. Would you like to see her now?" Then, with her eyes on mine and noticing my bewildered look, "No doubt," she added with a queer expression, "Nokomis wasn't quite well yesterday. She is getting old, you know." She rose restlessly. "Will you wait a moment, please? I want to speak to Leah," and she went out. Something had passed over her spirits. I couldn't tell what. It was like the shadow of a cloud sweeping rapidly across the sunny hillside. Whatever it was gone when she returned. She went directly to the window, threw up the sash, and called down, "Nokomis!" "Hi, Nokomis," a bark responded. "Come up here, old lady." "Yes, come right up. Wipe your feet, please. Wipe your feet, Nokomis." The next thing there was a pattering of feet upon the stairs, and the bitch bounded into the room, her tail wagging. She ran up to Miss Fielding immediately for orders. "Go and say how'd you do that." "Go and say how'd you do. How do you do to Mr. Castle, Nokomis," said Miss Fielding, pointing at me. Nokomis dropped to the floor again, and with the dignity of a duchess, walked over to where I lay, raised her beautiful eyes to mine, lifted a forepaw, and laid it on the bed. I shook it and felt for the dog's neck. Now, Nokomis, Miss Fielding began. She was down on the instant, went to her mistress, and stood waiting, her head on one side, her ears half erect, her tail low. Go and bring up Chevalier, please, was the command. Nokomis was off like an arrow, and presently there was a to-do in the yard. By this time I could recognize Nokomis's heavy note among the others. Then she and a tan and black collie came rollicking into the room. Both came immediately up to their mistress. Here's Chevalier, Mr. Castle. He's a pretty good show dog, isn't he? He hasn't got a fancy livery, but he's all right, except his tail's set on a bit too high, and there's a little feather to his hind legs below the hock. Chevalier whined and looked up at Miss Fielding. I was quite ready to believe the dog understood what she said. Oh, that's all right, Chev. You's a booful good doggy, and I love you. Chevalier's strain harks back to the original Scott. He's quite a swell in his way and has got blue ribbons, but they all want tricolored calico dogs now. Go over and pay your respects, Chevalier, please. The dog came up to me, was patted, and left with Nokomis, who was next instructed to return with John O'Groat, a big dog, almost wholly black, with a rather blunter muzzle than the others. John's got pretty good blood, too, and his mother was from the Lothian Hills like Norval. No, that was the Grampians. A little hollow-backed, and his forelegs aren't quite straight. But Jack's a good dog, aren't you, Jack? A fine worker, too. Jack was certainly listening to every word attentively, whether he understood or not. After he had gone, Nokomis brought up Minnehaha, one of her own youngsters, pure white. Poor little Minnie, said Miss Fielding. She's got yellow eyes and a thin coat, but I love her just as much. Taking the forepaw, she held her own face tantalizingly near the dog's tongue. Just as much I do. Now go over to Mr. Castle, miss. Last of all came Hiawatha, a frenzied, wriggling, capering puppy. Sable and white like his mother, yelping, crouching, bounding, hysterical with joy. Miss Fielding and I fell to laughing at his antics, but Hiawatha was too young to care. He was up on top of my bed in half a minute and stifling me with his eagerness, lapping my face and hands, growling, snarling, biting, scratching all at once. When this frisky, capering bunch of enthusiasm had departed, quite out of his head with the excitement of the visit, Miss Fielding talked dog for 10 minutes. She had not forgotten, however, to compliment her pets with a lump of sugar apiece, filched from my tray and dropped from the window with strict precedence. Oh, I said, looking at her with admiration, I do think your own name is the best. It's so like you. What do you mean? She asked, coming up to me. Why, Joy, I replied. Of course it is. Isn't it fun to have a name like that? One has quite to live up to it, though. It inspires me sometimes when I'm blue. Yes, it has distinction. I don't see why you ever should prefer Edna. Oh, Edna, she said seriously. She waited a moment to shake from her skirt the sand the dog's paws had left. Well, I do like Edna sometimes. It depends upon my mood, I suppose. You know I told you I had moods. Don't try to reconcile me. I know I'm inconsistent, but I'm a woman, she added, looking up more brightly, and I suppose I have that right. I haven't decided whether you're a woman or not, I returned. Sometimes I have thought you were a princess in disguise. Oh, that's nice of you, but why? You're so mysterious, so whimsical, so detached, so romantic. Take care, she warned severely. You aren't trying to swim off the island, are you? I opened my eyes at this. You still hold me to my promise after yesterday? Why not, she said a little blankly. Why, I thought we were well off the island. At least you were. I thought that you had given up the game. Why, she asked, looking at me directly, in seeming surprise. I think you must have mistaken my meaning. I couldn't quite get it. You asked me all sorts of questions. Anyway, you know, I ventured. Her eyes begged for mercy. I'm sorry if I was impertinent. Oh, I didn't mean that, of course. You couldn't be. You had a perfect right to ask, of course. Can't I row back in a boat, please? She pouted whimsically. Don't give it up yet. Not till I give you specific leave of absence. I suppose I'm spoiled. I want my cake to keep and eat, too. I was a little relieved at a recognition of her own inconsistency, though I felt a queer hiatus somewhere. It was as if, mentally, I had tried to go up a step where there was none, but I let the subject drop. She took up the books on the stand and began to look them over. Don't you think Leah reads beautifully? She asked. It's charming to hear her, but if you don't mind, I prefer to hear you. She took all my compliments so graciously, without either embarrassed denial or vanity, that I loved to watch her when I tried a gallantry. Now she only nodded to me, sweepingly, with mock deference, and went on. Leah and I disagree somewhat. I have more manner, perhaps, and less rhythm. We read a good deal together. I think she sees Browning much more clearly than I. Perhaps I feel him more keenly. She's a remarkable girl, I was going to add, for a negress, but I needn't qualify it. Oh, no, you don't know how fine she is, seating herself, she added, as if to herself in a sort of sigh, what that girl has done for me. I am sure that she would say just that of you, I remarked. Oh, I try her a good deal sometimes. Her mother was my nurse. When I sent for Leah, I didn't expect to get anything more than perhaps some of the hereditary devotion darkies have. Oh, man. Even if I got that. But I got a friend. You can't trust her too far, Mr. Castle, believe me. She's pure gold. It happened that, as she spoke, Leah herself came into the room with letters for me. Miss Fielding took the girl's hand and pressed it against her own cheek affectionately. As she did so, I noticed a peculiar scar, a livid U-shaped mark on Leah's wrist. It was the sort of scar that might be left from the wound of a carving tool, one of the narrower gouges. Was I very horrid yesterday, Leah? Miss Fielding asked, looking up into the fine brown face. Oh, please, Miss Joy, Leah begged uneasily. Of course you understand, Leah. I only want Mr. Castle to know I'm sorry, Miss Fielding insisted. I need only to look at you to be sure you're sorry, and to look at Leah to be sure that there's no need of it, I declared. At any rate, there's no need of my understanding. In fact, that's just what I thought you didn't want me to do, isn't it? Leah looked quickly from me to Miss Fielding, and back again. Yes, I suppose it is, Miss Fielding said slowly, thoughtfully. Let's get back on the island again. I'm sure it's big enough for us. We stayed, therefore, on the island all that afternoon, touching, that is, but lightly on personal topics. But though we did not go wide, we went deep enough to make the talk hold us absorbed for an hour or more. In quite another way, I think, we went far as well. Miss Fielding was a stimulating conversationalist. She made me feel at my best. She had that happy way of meeting me on my ground every little while, then going on and giving me a hand up to hers, and so by a series of alternate agreements and divergencies, keeping the discussion both sympathetic and various. In most of this quick give and take, Leah was a passive listener unless specially appealed to, at which times she often expressed herself so succinctly and sapiently that Miss Fielding and I looked at her and then at one another with a comic expression of admiration and depreciation of our own powers. With such conversation the day went fast. In the afternoon Miss Fielding read to me, and in the evening I spent 2 or 3 hours in passive delight listening to her violin. My pain had almost subsided now, and I looked forward with something more poignant than regret at being able to be up and about, knowing that would mean the beginning of the end of our companionship. And thus we come to the end of Chapter 5. Chapter 6 awaits, bruv. Goodbye. Goodbye.